The bond between a person and their dog is something truly special. They're not just pets. They're family members who watch over us, often seeing or hearing things we can't. Sometimes, they're the only thing standing between us and a terrifying situation. The following stories were submitted by viewers who believe they owe their lives, or the lives of their loved ones, to their loyal canine companions. Sheriff and the Basement Intruder. Sam was just a teenager when the incident happened, and his parents had left him in charge of his younger sister Cassie for a Friday night. He didn't have any plans to go out, so it was a perfect excuse to dive deep into a new video game that had just come out. He was sprawled on his bed, lost in the digital world with his headphones on, the soft glow of his monitor illuminating his face. Next to him, his German shepherd, Sheriff, was a giant, lazy lump of fur on the comforter. Sheriff was an 80-pound, gentle giant. He was a couch potato who preferred to sleep or eat rather than be a guard dog. So, when he suddenly lifted his head, his ears twitching and his body going rigid, it was enough to pull Sam's attention away from the game. He paused the game and pulled off his headphones, listening intently to the silence of the house. He didn't hear a thing. It was probably just the wind or a car driving by. He put his headphones back on, but his dog didn't move. He was still staring, his gaze fixed on the half-open bedroom door, his ears perked up like two radars. Sam went back to his game, but the moment he put his headphones on, Sheriff was off the bed in a flash. The dog tore into the hallway, a low, guttural growl rumbling deep in his chest. Sam could hear the frantic clicking of the dog's nails on the hardwood floor as he went from one end of the house to the other. "Sheriff, shut up!" Sam yelled, annoyed. He was so close to a save point, and the last thing he wanted was to deal with a noisy dog. But then, the barks changed. Wasn't the excited, playful barks the dog used when a friend came over. This was a deep, aggressive, defensive bark. It was the kind of bark he only used when another dog got too close to their fence. The kind of bark that meant, "You are a threat." Sam's stomach dropped. This wasn't a squirrel in the backyard. This wasn't a random car. His dog was confronting something or someone. He ripped his headphones off and ran out of his room. He reached the hallway just in time to hear a new, terrifying sound. The distinct clicking of Sheriff's nails on the basement steps, followed by a loud, muffled thump as he flew down them. He'd never seen his dog go down there like that. The basement was a place full of old, forgotten junk, a place they rarely used. Whatever was down there, Sheriff saw it as a serious threat. Sam stood at the top of the dark, steep basement stairs, staring into the blackness. The air felt heavy, and the dog's frantic barks echoed up from the concrete abyss. He fumbled for the light switch and flipped it on, illuminating the space with a single, bare light bulb. He slowly made his way down the stairs. The basement was just as he remembered it, shelves full of old board games and books, and a single door at the far end of the room. The laundry room. Sheriff was standing at that door, his body tense, his tail rigid. He was barking furiously and scratching at the wood. It was like he was trying to tear the door off its hinges. Sam had never seen him act with such aggression. He trusted his dog with a certainty that chilled him to the bone. There was someone on the other side of that door. Without a second thought, Sam reached down, grunting as he struggled to lift his massive dog into his arms. The dog was still barking and straining to get back to the door. Sam stumbled back up the stairs, his heart pounding in his ears. Just as he reached the top and put his hand on the door handle, he heard it, a quiet creak from below. The laundry room door was opening. Sam slammed the basement door shut and fumbled with the lock, the click echoing in the sudden silence. Sheriff was still whining and trying to get out of his arms. He put his ear to the door and listened. Barely audible over Sheriff's frantic whimpers, he heard it. The soft creak of a stair, then another, then another. Whoever was in that laundry room was now coming up the stairs. Sam didn't hesitate. He dove for the landline phone on the kitchen wall and dialed 911. His sister Cassie, who had just come out of her room to see what all the commotion was, stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. Sam told the operator what was happening, his voice shaking. The police said they were on their way. Sam grabbed his sister's hand and they ran to his bedroom, locking the door behind them. Sheriff was still barking. a constant low growl now as he guarded the door. They sat on his bed, shaking for what felt like an eternity. A few minutes later, they heard the faint wail of sirens approaching. The police arrived and surrounded the house. They stayed in his room until they heard the officers' footsteps upstairs. The officers told them to stay put, that they were clearing the house. They didn't find anyone inside. One of the officers came to the door to tell them it was all clear and that they could come out. When they did, the officer told them they'd caught him. As Sam and his sister watched from the front window, the police let a man out of their basement window. He was a skinny guy in a dirty hoodie, and he had a crowbar in his hand. He must have been trying to get out through the window when the police showed up. Sam said he'll never forget the cold, dead look the man gave him as he was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and was just angry they got caught. But Sam said he'll also never forget how grateful he was to have Sheriff that night. The dog who had always seemed too lazy to be a guard dog had, in the end, been the only thing standing between them and a terrifying reality. Mandy and the man in the attic. He was 15 years old at the time, and his family had a Beagle Pointer mix named Mandy. She was by all accounts the sweetest and most loyal dog he had ever met. She wouldn't harm a fly, but she did have a deep, booming bark that could wake the whole neighborhood. They had her for 11 years before she passed away, and this particular night was a story he would always tell. It was a completely normal night. The sun had set hours ago, and he was getting ready for bed, walking into his room to finally crash after a long day. As soon as he opened the door, a low, guttural growl broke the silence of the quiet house. It was Mandy, lying on her bed in the corner. She wasn't looking at him, or anything in particular for that matter. She just had her head down, a low, constant rumble coming from her chest. He found it funny and playfully asked her what was wrong, and she just let out an annoyed doggy sigh before putting her head down again. For the next hour, as he rolled around in bed trying to fall asleep, Mandy would constantly break the silence with her growling. He would peek at her, but she still had her head down, her body stiff. He even tried to get her to go outside, hoping that would make her stop, but she showed no interest. It quickly went from a cute, quirky habit to just plain annoying. Eventually, his exhaustion won out, and he fell asleep anyway. He woke up a few hours later to the sound of her growling again. He looked at his digital clock and saw the glowing red numbers read 2 a.m. His eyes slowly adjusted to the dark, and he could just make out Mandy standing in the middle of the room, staring up. She wasn't looking at the wall, but at the elevated closet door, which had a small gap at the top that led to their attic. A shiver went down his spine. The attic was only accessible through a pull-down ladder. The thought of his dog staring up at a space that was supposed to be completely sealed off was disturbing. He reached over and flicked on his bedside lamp, illuminating the dark room. He watched as Mandy continued to stare intently at the closet, a tense, guttural growl rumbling in her chest. He didn't know what he was thinking, but for some reason, he decided to get out of bed and check what she was staring at. He slowly walked over and opened the closet door. There was nothing in the closet itself, just clothes and boxes. But he immediately noticed something was wrong. The attic door, which was always latched shut, was now cracked open. A horrifying wave of realization washed over him. His heart began to pound in his chest. He sprinted out of his room and down the hall to his parents' room, a cold, sickening fear flooding his body. He woke his dad up and tried to explain everything, but he didn't seem to take him too seriously until they got back to the room and saw Mandy standing there still growling and staring at the closet. His dad, a big guy who wasn't easily rattled, finally understood something was very wrong. He grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat from the hallway closet and went into the room. The son stood there, his stomach in knots, listening as his dad pushed open the closet door and climbed in. The air in the house was thick with tension. Then, all of a sudden, he heard his dad scream at the top of his lungs. He heard boxes fall, something heavy shatter, and then a groan of pain from his father. His heart stopped. Someone came rushing out of the closet. The son hoped it was his dad, but instead, a huge man at least 6'5" with a hammer in his hand jumped out and ran past him. But what happened next was something that still surprises everyone he tells this story to. Mandy, who had been a loyal, gentle dog for over a decade, suddenly leaped up with a speed she shouldn't have had, catching the man's arm with her teeth. The man let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping the hammer onto the hardwood floor with a loud clang. His dad, who had been groaning in pain, came rushing out of the closet just in time to jump onto the intruder and take him down. His mom, who had woken up from the commotion, ran to get his little brother's toy handcuffs. His dad held the man down while he frantically snapped the plastic cuffs on him. They held him there with a mix of fear and adrenaline until the police arrived. The man was thankfully sent to jail. He never found out what the man's intentions were, but the fact that he was carrying a hammer with him suggested he wasn't just planning on robbing them. If they didn't have Mandy at that time, and if she hadn't been so insistent on letting them know something was wrong, he could only imagine what would have happened to their family. It's a reminder of just how much we owe to our loyal pets and to our own instincts when something feels wrong. Shadow on the sidewalk. He was 11 years old at the time, and his younger brother was 8. It was a clear, cool evening, and they were on their nightly walk with their dog Buster around the block. Buster was a big, friendly, husky German shepherd mix, a gentle giant who loved people. It was getting dark, but they had done this same walk 100 times, and it was a quiet neighborhood. Nothing ever happened. As they turned the corner to the next street, they saw a man standing on the sidewalk ahead of them. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and he gave them a wide, unsettling smile as they approached. It was a toothy grin that didn't reach his eyes. He stopped walking, and it seemed like he was waiting for them to stop and talk to him. A strange feeling of unease settled in the older brother's stomach, and he just kept his head down and pulled his brother along, walking right past the man without a word. A minute later, his brother nudged him and whispered, "He's following us." The older brother tried to brush him off, but a knot of nervous energy in his stomach told him to look back anyway. Sure enough, the man was about 20 feet behind them, his dark silhouette stark against the fading light. When he saw the older brother look, he stopped dead and pretended to be looking at his phone. But as soon as the boy turned back around, his brother told him he started walking again. The knot in his stomach tightened. The two boys sped up their pace. They were just a few houses away from home now, and the older brother kept telling himself it was nothing, that the man was just going in the same direction. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He could hear the man's footsteps behind them getting closer, and the sound was like a drumbeat, counting down the seconds until they were home. Suddenly, a muffled scream sounded beside him. His heart stopped. He turned and saw the man's arm wrapped around his brother, his hand clamped over his mouth. He was trying to pull the 8-year-old away from him, a desperate struggle taking place just feet from the sanctuary of their own home. Before the older brother could even process what was happening, Buster exploded. The dog had been walking calmly by his side, but he suddenly started barking like a rabid dog. He ripped the leash right out of the older brother's hand and lunged at the man, a blur of fur and muscle. The dog latched onto the man's leg, sinking his teeth in. The man let out a high, piercing scream of pain. Their neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, heard the commotion and came out of her front door. She took one look at the situation, saw the tall man struggling with the dog, and immediately started yelling, "What are you doing? Get out of here!" The man, still screaming and hopping on one foot, finally let go of the younger brother. He scrambled away, looking at them with a look of pure rage and defeat. The older brother grabbed Buster's leash and managed to snap it back on him, struggling to hold the massive dog back as he tried to chase the man down the street. His brother, terrified but thankfully unharmed, ran to Mrs. Gable. She was a tiny woman, probably no bigger than 5 feet tall, but she had a big heart and a fierce attitude. While the older brother held on to Buster, she called the police. She then walked the boys to their front door and told their parents what had happened. The police arrived a few minutes later and began questioning them and Mrs. Gable. Shortly after, an officer came back to them and told them they had caught the man a few blocks away, limping down the sidewalk. One of the officers told them Buster was a hero. They already knew that, of course, but it was nice to hear it from someone else. It's a memory that still haunts him, but he said he'll always be grateful for the way Buster protected them that night. Lady and the Face in the Window. Sarah grew up with a pit bull mix named Lady. She was a rescue, and while she was normally the sweetest, most gentle dog in the world, she was also incredibly protective of her family. Sarah was about 16 at the time, and her parents were out for the night while her younger sister was at a sleepover. It was just Lady and her in the house. It was late, probably around 11 p.m., and Sarah was curled up on the couch in the living room, watching a movie on her laptop. Lady was lying on the rug at Sarah's feet, snoring softly. The house was quiet and still, with only the faint sounds from the movie filling the room. Everything was peaceful. Suddenly, Lady lifted her head. A low growl rumbled in her chest. It wasn't her normal, "I'm a tough dog," warning, but something deeper and more serious. Sarah paused her movie and looked around the dark room, but she didn't see anything. She figured Lady just heard a car passing by or a raccoon getting into the trash cans outside. Sarah reached down to pet her, but Lady pulled away, her body tense. Her eyes were fixed on the sliding glass door that led to their backyard. Lady's growl quickly escalated into a frantic, desperate bark Sarah had never heard from her before. She started pacing back and forth, scratching at the glass door, her whole body rigid with tension. Her barking wasn't a warning anymore. It was a frantic alarm. Feeling a sudden knot of dread in her stomach, Sarah got up and walked to the door to see what was upsetting her. The yard was pitch black. There was a motion-activated light near their shed, but it was off. She peered out into the darkness for a few moments, but she couldn't see anything. All she could hear was the rustling of the trees and Lady's insistent barking. Feeling a bit silly for being so scared, Sarah tried to calm Lady down. She grabbed her collar to pull her away from the door, but the dog was resisting with all her might, still growling and snapping at the air. This was so unlike her. Then Sarah saw it. Just for a second, in the window reflection, a pale, indistinct face appeared in the darkness outside, looking directly back at her. Sarah screamed and jumped back, her heart pounding in her chest. "Lady!" As if she knew Sarah had finally seen it too, let out a ferocious bark and lunged at the glass. Sarah didn't wait to see if the face was still there. She grabbed her phone, and with Lady close behind her, she ran to her parents' bedroom and locked the door. She called 911, her voice shaking so much she could barely get the words out. She told the dispatcher that someone was in her backyard. She could hear Lady whimpering and scratching at the bedroom door, wanting to get out and protect her. Sarah held her close, telling her that everything would be okay. The police arrived a few minutes later and found the backyard gate ajar. The motion-activated light near the shed had been unscrewed, and there were fresh footprints in the damp grass that led right up to the sliding glass door. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. The officers told Sarah that whoever it was must have fled when they heard her scream. Sarah never saw the face again, and she never found out who it was. But she'll never forget that cold, horrible feeling of seeing that face in the dark and the frantic, desperate barks of her dog, who knew something was wrong long before she did. If Lady hadn't been so persistent, Sarah might have stayed in that living room, completely oblivious to the fact that someone was watching her from the darkness, just waiting for the right moment to come in. The Porch Light. This story was sent in by a viewer named Emily, and it's a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest things are the ones you almost don't notice. A few years back, Emily was living alone in a small house on a quiet suburban street. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other, and you didn't really worry about locking your doors. She had an old dog, a golden retriever named Max, who was more of a lazy teddy bear than a guard dog. One Friday night, Emily was home alone, binging a new show on Netflix. It was late, maybe around 1 a.m. The house was completely dark except for the light from her TV screen. The street outside was dead silent, not even the sound of a car passing by. She was so engrossed in the show that when the doorbell rang, she jumped. It was an old-fashioned chime, not the kind that rings a little tune, but a loud, jarring ding-dong. It was way too late for anyone to be stopping by, and a cold wave of dread washed over her. She paused the TV and sat perfectly still, her heart pounding. The doorbell didn't ring again. For a solid minute, All she heard was the frantic beating of her own heart. She peeked through the blinds on her front window. The porch light was off, so it was hard to see anything clearly. She could just make out a shadowy figure standing on her porch. It was a man, dressed in a hoodie with his back to the door. He was just standing there, completely still, looking out at the street. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Who would just stand on a stranger's porch at 1 a.m.? She didn't move. She just watched him, hoping he would get bored and leave. But he didn't. He just stood there, a silent statue in the dark. After what felt like an eternity, he finally turned around. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. He was looking directly at her window. She felt the horrifying jolt of realization he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the small gap in her blinds, at the faint glow of the TV. He knew someone was home. Then, she saw it. In his hand, he was holding a small metallic object. It looked like a pair of pliers. He reached out and with a quick, deliberate motion, he unscrewed her porch light bulb and put it in his pocket. The action was so mundane, so confident, that it was even more terrifying than if he had broken something. It was as if he had been planning this all along. He didn't ring the doorbell again. He just walked down the steps and disappeared into the darkness. Emily watched him go, her body trembling. As soon as she was sure he was gone, she ran to the phone and called 911, her voice shaking as she explained what had happened. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They checked the porch, the yard, and the perimeter of the house. They didn't find anything, but one of the officers noticed something in the dirt near her front door. It was a small, white piece of chalk. The officer explained that sometimes home invaders will mark a house with chalk to let other criminals know that it's a good target, or that the person living there is home alone. Emily's blood ran cold. She remembered the man's gaze, the way he had looked at her window. He wasn't just a random stranger. He was there for a reason. He had seen the light and he had marked her house. The ringing of the doorbell wasn't to announce his presence. It was to see if anyone was home. And when she didn't answer, he knew she was home alone. The police told her to keep her doors locked and to be extra vigilant. They said they would patrol her street more frequently. Emily ended up moving a few months later. She just couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The idea that someone had been standing on her porch, staring through the blinds, and leaving a sign for others to find. She still keeps her porch light on every night, a silent defiance against the darkness. But every time the doorbell rings unexpectedly, a part of her freezes up, and she thinks back to that night and the man who wanted to make her a target.